Hello YouTube. I've never shown the process of taking the engine and putting it into the car, so I thought we'd do that today. We'll put the engine over the hole we want it to go into. Lower it down a little bit. Push it further back into the car. Lower it down some more. So as not to hit the tie rod. And push it back in some more. And now what we got to do is lift the tail a little bit so that we can get the oil pan over the tie rod. Push it back in a little bit further. We're not going to clear this rod yet, so we got to crank up the back end a little bit more. Now we'll clear the tie rod end. We'll let the motor down some more. And get the motor mount lined up and lower it down so that we can put the 1/2-inch motor mount bolt in. Off come the lifting chains. We have to put a nut on the back of our motor mount bolt and tighten it up. And do the same thing on the other side. These leads provide power to the whole car. The front circuit breaker is for the water pump and the electric fan. The rear circuit breaker, which is 30 amps, powers the rest of the car. And what I do is I put that underneath the terminal for the battery to run the starter. There's no real good angle to do this from. It's almost by the feel, and that's the battery terminal on, and that's the power for the whole car. I'll try to put this nut on and tighten the terminal on the starter so that the battery cable is connected and the power for the car is connected. We'll take our trans brake wire and plug it in. We'll take our solenoid wire and plug that one in. And electrical on this side is done. Next up is the ground from the chassis to the block. And the water pump. And now we'll move to the carburetor. We'll peel the tape off the throat of the intake manifold. Now we'll put the intake to carburetor gasket on and set the carburetor on. Put a nut and a washer on each side. Not forgetting to put the throttle cable linkage on. Snap the throttle cable linkage on. Hook up the return springs required by NHRA. And our carburetor is installed. We can do 3 more things while we're in this area. This is the lead for the oil pressure line, and it's in braided steel because that's what NHRA requires. And this is by feel. I put it on the fitting on the back of the block, and it's an AN fitting. It's a 3. So we tighten that down. Oil fitting is tight. We can plug the coil in. And we can plug the distributor in. And we're all set up here now. We can move on. We'll move around to the passenger side and put the breather in there. Can't have that on there when we take the motor in and out. There's no room. And we'll hook up the temporary fuel line. It's an AN fitting, it's an 8 AN. That makes it a little easier. What we have to do is take this gasket and put it between the tailpipe and the exhaust manifold. Because of the bend in the pipe, we have to put the nut on this rear stud first before we push the flange all the way up. With the final couple turns on this last bolt here, the tailpipe is connected to the exhaust manifold. Here we are underneath the car, and we're putting the transmission mount bolts in. I should mention that the transmission doesn't have a torque converter in it, and there's no fluid in the transmission, so we don't have to hook up the coolant lines or the shift cable. The core support has been loaned out to a local radiator shop to build me a new radiator that'll hopefully keep this thing cool. So in order to run this thing, I'm going to have to just set the radiator here, supported by the hoses. I think it'll be good enough, but I want to hear it run, and I'm sure you do. A little glass cleaner, and slide the hose on. Goes something like that. Bring it over and set it on the cross member. A little glass cleaner. And we'll put the clamps on. So this is pretty solid. I think we'll be okay to run it. The hose is good to the intake. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta do the temperature sensor here. No sealant required here because the flare is the seal. Only on the pipe threads is there sealant. And we'll just screw this in and snug it up. These brass plugs that I put in here to replace the original plugs are pipe thread, and I've got sealant on them. And when I take an engine out of a vehicle, I drain the coolant out here so I don't get coolant all over the floor. And all I want to do is make sure that I tightened them up when I was done draining it out, and they're both tight. With the hoses clamped tight and the radiator pretty darn firm, we'll take the cap off and put some rust preventative into it, because we don't put antifreeze in here and I don't want the block to rust out. And now just plain old water, not the grass, just the water. Let's put some fuel in the tank. That'll be enough to let it idle for a little bit. Put the cap back on. Seems like we're at a critical point here. I don't think I've forgotten anything. I have disconnected the throttle pedal because it's sticking. I'm going to have to investigate that. I'm not going to wait for that now. But that's going to mean that I can't control the throttle from the inside. So what I'm going to do is pump it and go inside and push the starter and see if it starts. I have a timing light hooked up because the distributor is not bolted down real tight. I left it snug so that I could move it around, and I know I moved it in pulling it in and taking it out. So we're going to have to time it. That's no vacuum advance, no centrifugal advance. We run 36 degrees total advance. Okay, well, let's try it. There's a good squirt of gas. I'm going to turn the ignition on, I'll turn the fuel pump on, and I'll push the starter button. We'll pump it again, and we'll try it again. I believe we accomplished what we set out to do. We took a 454 that was hanging on an engine hoist and put it into our 1949 Chevrolet Fleetline gasser. We put on a makeshift cooling system so that we could run it. Put the carburetor back on, hooked up a temporary fuel system, and took the distributor, and once it's fired up, we set the timing. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.